A very warm welcome to all our enthusiastic participants from across time zones joining us today. My name is Nirupama and I will be your host for the session. For all our new participants, Five Elements Sustainable Development Group is a consultancy and a collaborative network of institutional and individual partners committed to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Under the mentorship of our chairman, Mr. Arun Amritam, we are on a mission to foster collaboration and consummate synergies to achieve impact at the nexus of smart cities and affordable housing, renewable energies and smart mobility, essential tech for development, impact finance and leadership development and capacity building. The Gender Justice India webinar series is brought to you by Five Elements SDG, where we bring on thought leaders, entrepreneurs, policy practitioners, and subject matter experts from around the world to engage with and discuss a plethora of issues related to the gender nature of society, polity, culture, and economy. Before I introduce our esteemed guests for the evening, let me humbly reiterate a few house rules. Respected participants are requested to keep their microphones muted. You are kindly encouraged to type in the comments and questions in the chat box. We are streaming live on YouTube as well, and hence questions will be picked up from the chat box there in addition to our Zoom event here. Please feel free to direct your questions on the platform you're watching this on, and we shall take them up during the Q&A session. This month, we are very kindly joined by Bhanupriya Rao, founder, BehanBox. BehanBox is a digital media platform exclusively for gender journalism. Its mission is to transform journalism by centering voices, concerns, aspirations, and achievements of women and gender diverse persons through in-depth and evidence-based reportage and storytelling. Bhanupriya has been an independent researcher and journalist, writing on gender, governance, and social justice. She is a passionate advocate for open data and right to information and has worked globally across Asia, Africa, and Europe on furthering transparency, accountability, and democratic governance. It is an honor to host you, Bhanupriya ma'am. Delighted that you are here with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nirupama, and for that very kind introduction. I'm very glad to be here talking about something that's really close to my heart, and something that's not just close to my heart, but what I feel is the need of the hour, really. So I really thank Five Elements for inviting me to talk about this. So essentially, what I'm going to be talking about today is specifically BehanBox, but why we need what we call gender journalism. In fact, the whole idea of gender journalism as a concept is pretty new and up and coming, and therefore I feel that it's important to talk about it so that there is more of it, and and more of it can sort of change the narrative. For participants, for our audience across who I believe are across the globe, BehanBox, I'll just simplify what BehanBox means. Behan in Hindi, which is one of the languages in India, means sister. And so what we essentially wanted to, when we were thinking about the idea of having an exclusively gender reportage platform to have this concept of sisterhood. And in India, especially in the northern parts of India and the Hindi speaking parts of India, Behan is not just sisters, not just a sister, but also a very endearing term of reference to a person who you feel very connected to, and usually that person you feel connected to in different sorts of ways, emotionally, but also culturally, but also, it's a form of also understanding the systemic oppression that and the kind of unity that and the collective that women are seeking, really. So that's when I'm asked why we named our platform as BehanBox, I really think that, growing up in the northern part of India, although I'm from the south of India, but growing up in the northern part of India, we would all call each other Behan just out of fun. and I knew that when I wanted to start something like this, the name Behan had to go somewhere there. And I feel a lot of people tell us that it kind of resonates, the whole idea of Behan resonates with them. So what we do at BehanBox is basically, our idea is to look at ways of making India more gender equal. Now, anyone who's grown up in India or is a watcher of India understands the pervasive inequality. There is gender inequality. And I can rattle out statistics upon statistics on how gender inequality, how pervasive it is. For example, only 14% of India's MPs are women, and that's just kind of growing very marginally every election. There's great income and wealth inequality. Women are very worryingly dropping out of the labor force. And of course, there is the insidious caste inequality, where women belonging to the Dalit and Adivasi communities are doubly disadvantaged. And there are statistics. Their access to justice is so limited. And it's fraught with issues. Dalit women tend to live 15 years lesser than their upper caste counterparts. And when all of these inequalities intersect, there's a kind of an intergenerational effect to it, which we've been seeing all of through the years, and studies have been documenting it. But what happens in the Indian media is that all of this becomes very invisible. Specifically, Indian media has a gender inequality issue. And again, these statistics are from a global media monitoring report, which says that only 14% of subjects in the Indian media have anything to do with women. And this has been constantly reducing, not going upwards, even as we are talking about making India gender equal and all sorts of looking at improving our indicators. If those issues are not reflected in the media, there is hardly any chance that that will be acted upon and people will get to know what the issues are. What we are also seeing as these reports tend to mention is that 95% of the reports that we see in the media have severe gender stereotypes that we have been used to. Say something like an issue like gender-based violence. Only 1% of media reports even talk about gender-based violence, and even when they do, it's mostly as an event. We don't go beyond and understand the structures of it. We don't understand why this is happening. What is the access to justice for victims of or survivors of gender-based violence? And how does the access to justice for even the most marginal of women work out? So these are issues that are just not there in the Indian media. And that is because Indian media has a particularly a problem of diversity. Newsrooms across the world have problems of diversity, but Indian media particularly, because it's largely led by upper caste men. And so caste, gender, and other marginalities remain invisible. And I'm talking about the mainstream media. There are, of course, very alternate media that are coming up and that are trying to reverse this trend. So why is this a problem? Why this lack of diversity and so on? Why is that a problem? Now, increasingly, what is happening globally and especially in India, we see is that women are demanding for a more gender equal world, right? But there is a severe lack of resources and information. And what that does is it limits public awareness and therefore action. So what you see is gender norms continue to persist, discriminatory laws continue to exist, and policies remain unchallenged. In fact, tomorrow we are coming up with one story on in the wake of the Roe versus Wade situation in the US, and this whole narrative about how our own abortion laws, India's abortion laws, are very progressive. Our story talks about how not really they're progressive, because what may seem like very progressive in the access of it, in the implementation of it, and in the reality of it, they're severely discriminatory. And we'll see that how. Now, why we want to do, why, so what we try to do really is to kind of right that historic wrong. We felt that that needed to be corrected. And as journalists, as researchers, there are several ways to correct this. But as journalists and researchers, we thought the way that we most know to do this is to have an exclusive gender journalism platform. We wanted to correct the imbalances in the Indian media ecosystem. So we wanted to make gender issues more visible so that public are more aware. And at the end of it, what we really want is that laws, policies, and norms change for the better. So I'm just going to introduce what BehanBox is. It's an independent media platform where we look at gender issues with a focus on law, policy, and politics. So are we the only gender platform in India? There are platforms where we are what our stories try to do is go really in depth. They tell you the why of things. So we do not just talk about some event of gender based violence. We go behind and tell you why what are the reasons for that. What are the structures that prevent women from accessing justice? What are the structures that prevent gender based violence from becoming a public health issue, for example? How are laws that are very progressive not working for women? How are states failing women? Having said that, we do not present women and other gender diverse persons only as victims or only as people without their agency. If you look at any of our stories, what we try to show is that we try to what we look at is how structures fail women and gender diverse persons, right? So what we try to do is we try and see and demonstrate as to how all of this issues of gender are a governance issue, right? And also what we at BehanBox, what we believe is that there is not one single gender issue or a basket of gender issues, as there is the common understanding that, oh, abortion is a gender issue, or violence is a gender issue. For us, everything is a gender issue. So what we try and do is we look at every law, every policy, every event, every pattern from a uniquely gender lens. And that's because we believe that that lens is missing. And we also believe that everything affects women differently. Everything affects gender diverse persons differently. Everything affects women and gender diverse persons from different marginalities differently. So that's a perspective. That's not just a perspective. In fact, it is part of our DNA. It is inbuilt into the lens with which we look at. So all our reporting, all our editorial, all the way we construct our stories, the way we ask our reporters to work on, or the issues we choose to work on are or write about, or are completely engulfed by this lens. Like I said, we are definitely there are other platforms that talk about gender issues, and that is great. The more, the merrier. What I just wanted to say why we are how we are trying to create a different sort of a platform. First, we are bringing in the old values of journalism: in-depth reportage, holding power to account, going behind the structures, telling you the why of things and not just the what of things, right? And we are also our reportage is very sensitive. As I said, we do not do poverty porn at all. We do not sensationalize things. We give you a lot of data, in-depth reporting, ground reports, evidence-based, and storytelling that gives you like a real reflection of what is going on with the sections of the population that are are completely left out of media narratives. Um, and one of the reasons we've seen, so I at this point I have to tell you that we started BehanBox in July actually, July 2020, right when we were we were all grappling with the pandemic. And the reason why we started BehanBox at that time, even though we knew it was going to be in so many ways difficult for us, was because we realized that the pandemic was only going to exacerbate all the structural sort of existing inequalities that women and other and gender diverse persons face, right? The existing inequalities were only going to deepen, and we wanted to, in the course of the pandemic and during the pandemic and after, we wanted to document that. And therefore, despite it hasn't been easy completely for us as a new platform trying to work across time zones and virtually and everything, but we thought this moment needed to be the patterns, the impact of it needed to be documented, and those stories needed to be told. And since in the last 1.5 years, when we started using the term gender journalism, it kind of wasn't a very current current sort of a usage. And now we see that the word, the term itself is being so it's you know it isn't seen as, oh, just one of those niche things. We wanted to make the niche mainstream, and we, in lots of ways, we are able to do that because of the kind of in-depth reportage we do. We've managed to collaborate with some of the biggest platforms and most well-known platforms across India, where either we collaborate on stories, or some of our own reportage, our stories get republished so that they reach wider audiences and so on. So that in the 1.5 years, we've managed to sort of make the idea that an exclusive gender lens on issues, not only that it is important, but that it needs to be done on a sustained basis. And in some ways, I feel we believe that newsrooms are beginning to see that change as well. Here are so the kind of like earlier I was talking about how we don't just do event based reporting of 500 words. Our stories are really in depth, long, and they touch upon issues that have been out of the mainstream media's lens. For example, some our biggest set of stories, or in fact something that really pushed us into public prominence, was our series on ASHA workers, the Indian healthcare workers, who at the time of the pandemic we when it wasn't as if they were not being talked about. They were beginning to certain reports were beginning to emerge, but what we wanted to do was go further beyond and understand how this cadre of workers who were really sort of at the forefront of managing the crisis, managing the whole pandemic, what were they going through, what was it, because we knew that they were, from our earlier research and everything, that they were not even considered as a workforce. So therefore, they were being paid a pittance. They were seen as as voluntary workers. And so we knew that with the pandemic, with the increased workload, a lot of that effect was going to fall on them. And so we did an investigative series of a series of 3 reports in collaboration with Article 14, where we looked at the different across 16 states actually. And it's amazing. It's even a miracle that we pulled that off amidst lockdown. But in those 16 states, we looked at what these workers were, how their incomes had dropped due to the pandemic, how states were not paying attention to them, how they were making them overwork, and they were being underpaid. So that series really kind of that made national news and international news also. Even today, when when organizations like the BBC or New York Times or recently the Independent, they want to write about ASHA workers, these are the stories they quote, because this is not just stories. These are not just reports. There's a whole lot of data within it, which we've collected and put out in public in terms of how the women healthcare workers who really hold up this whole entire healthcare system in the country were being it gives you a glimpse. It tells you the pervasiveness of the problem that is the violation of the labor rights of women healthcare workers, and that extends to any other sort of work that women do. And so therefore for us, labor rights and working women's rights is a big area that we work on constantly. So we worked on BD workers, women farmers, women. We look at laws that affect women and their work, etc. The other series that we are very proud of having done is the entire series on violence and exclusion faced by women and trans persons with disabilities. Disabilities in the mainstream media is hardly ever talked about. So we have tried to look at it from a gamut of angles, actually, looking at abortion rights for women with disabilities, what it means to be a mother for a woman with intimate partner violence, then accessibility, transport, mobility, an entire series. Similarly, on gender-based violence is another area that is a big focus. Again, in all of this, we are trying to understand the reasons behind it. Why are things the way they are? And what we also realize while doing all of these series, and the other series is the series on women's land rights. Um, which we looked at. So we have equal inheritance laws, but in operation, they don't really work very well. And that is what that series looked at, especially from Gujarat. So essentially what I'm trying to say, is that apart from all these important issues that we talk about, it is the how of it also in which we are sort of trying to walk the talk. So remember how I talked about the diversity issue in our newsrooms. Okay, so how are we different so how are we trying to sort of answer that diversity issue? We are a very small newsroom, and even in that very small newsroom, we are a diverse set of entirely women led, of course, and women like staffed by women. But um, uh, so some of these are fellowship driven reportage, for example, the one on women's land rights and women with disabilities. So what we try when we give out fellowships, we reserve half of the fellowships for women. We only work with women reporters. They half of them are for women coming from the marginalized communities, Dalits, Bahujans, Adivasis, etc. And we all the stories that are on violence against Muslim women are done by Muslim women, right? Stories on Kashmir are done by Kashmiri journalists. So that is how we try and ensure. And as we expand, it is something that we as a policy will continue to do. Is even in our full-time staff and reporters, we will have that kind of so we don't say, oh, we encourage people to apply, we reserve positions. That's something we believe we need to do to if we are to correct that historical imbalance within our newsrooms also. So I just want to talk about a little bit about the impact that we have done. We've managed to create so far, and we have a really long way to go. So we've like, as I mentioned, we've reported on some critically underreported issues, and I've talked about it, so I won't go into it all over again. And in doing that, I feel we have in some ways been able to flip those gender stereotypes, right? And I remember in this instance, I really do want to talk about the how when the farm law laws agitation started in November 2021. Sorry, November 2020 actually. Some of the first images coming out of the Singhu border in Delhi, etc., were male farmers, and women were sort of the images that came out were mostly women making the rotis and serving the agitating farmers and in the tents and everything. But I knew that somewhere, I knew that is just half the story. I will not say that is not important, because care work is part of agitation, and care work can be and is always resistance, in some ways resistance as well. But that was part only half of the stories, because I do know that from my readings earlier that women were part of the women farmers especially were part of the labor, the farmer unions in Punjab. And I do know from reading, seeing some YouTube reports here and there, that women were actually actively participating in mobilizing. So what we did was we wanted to follow that as a story. We were not interested in um, so there were two angles, two important things to that story. So farm laws, if you looked at farm laws, it seemed like a very neutral issue, and therefore male in so many ways. So we wanted to look at what were some of the implications of the farm laws on women as farmers. And women constitute 78% of India's agriculture, agri work, actually. And yet they're not given the status of farmers. They're not called farmers. They don't have land rights. So what we wanted to see was, through law and through policy and looking at data and everything, what were some of the possible impacts that these farm laws were going to have on women as farmers. Right, in fact, we were the first people to put out that story, that kind of analysis, and then that went on to be quoted by some of the global media outlets as well. And then we did an entire story on how women actually were not just roti makers at Singhu, but they were active mobilizers back in their villages, in mobilizing women and others also on the harm that these farm laws were going to be creating. So they had a more active role to play, both as farmers, both as farmer union leaders, and so on. And that's something we put out in January of 2021. And I remember after that, there was a flurry of, a little later on, there were a flurry of stories on, even Time magazine put the woman farmer on their cover. And that was a good thing to see that, women here, if you saw pre-January coverage of the farm protest versus post, you will see a marked difference. And in some ways, I feel that that shift in narrative was really, really important, because women, especially in the way women farmers are counted as workforce in Indian agriculture, right? And particularly in the context of the farm laws agitation. The stereotype that we kind of try to flip is in the political sphere. In fact, gender and politics is one of our big verticals that we work on quite a lot. And we've how young women are not seen as political leaders. Politics is not for women. Two, politics is not for young women. So even if there are women, they are from political families who have been pushed into so the narrative is that. But whereas with our reporting, with our stories, we've tried to show that young women have political aspirations. They want to lead. They have aspirations to contest elections. So we've been doing a set of stories on how young women are kind of like focusing on their political aspirations. And the I think the more satisfying sort of change that we've been able to manifest as far as reporting is concerned is our Asha workers reports, which I talked about earlier, that really at that point led the government to increase their COVID incentive, which is paltry, to a longer period. I wouldn't call it like a massive shift in law and a massive shift in policy and the change of conditions, but they did at that point did take that little tiny a tiny step towards towards their welfare, but much more needs to be done, definitely. And similarly, there was we reported an instance of series on malnutrition in Uttar Pradesh. That really led the government, the district administration, to sort of immediately create health camps and drinking water situation and so on for those impacted. So I have always, again, as someone who's running running an organization, or trying to, when we started BehanBox, we thought we wanted to do it because we felt the gap. We felt, and the gaps have already talked about. We felt that, gender issues are not being covered about. Our understanding of gender was very binary. So we and we wanted to really plug that gap. We knew we wanted to do this, and so we set about doing it. And over the period of time, in fact, early this year, we thought we should go back to some of our audience and ask them, what really are we doing? Are we kind of reinventing the wheel, or are we just talking to void and so on? And some of those things are really reassuring for us, especially when young. I think for me, personally, as a founder, what is each of those audience segments, when they tell us what value we bring or why this is important, forget about the value we bring, why this is necessary, why gender reporting is important, when young people come and say that, what your reports really help us understand the world, because our classrooms don't teach us that, right? Or when we talk about intersectional feminism, really, because that word keeps flying about every time, here, there, and everywhere. And you want to understand really, how does this intersectional sort of oppression work? And this is what students tell us, that when we read your reports, we understand, oh, this is exactly how, not having access to land as a resource means for a Dalit woman, or access to just lack of access to justice, or for a Dalit and Adivasi woman, in instance of sexual violence, for example. So that is very heartening. And it's not just heartening, you feel that this is important. You feel that, this, our classroom should be teaching more of, our institutions should be talking more of. um, but also, what I feel is that when men, and this is one of the ways in which we try to shift the needle also, is that when men come and tell us that, yes, we've grown up with so much internalized patriarchy and so on, that we take a lot of things for granted, and now we see that, for example, exactly how gender-based violence operates, how sexual harassment happens, or institutional recourse to justice doesn't work. So when we learn these things, we see these things, we try and influence others around us to look at these as issues, and that's important, because we are, I feel that, apart from talking to each other as women, and others as and other genders, I think it's important to also try and help men reflect on how they are benefiting from this thing, from the system. The other thing I feel, a lot of journalists have told us that, this has given BehanBox and organizations like ours have given them that space to explore that kind of journalism. Because you see in mainstream media and even other alternate media, there is a certain focus on some things that are more important than these, right, in their worldview. And so they've come and told us that, we so what when we work with journalists, we give them a lot of time, because understanding these, going to the ground, reporting, understanding the patterns, doing the background research, all of this takes time. So we're not hurrying anyone up. Um, so that's what journalists appreciate, because in mainstream media houses, they don't have that kind of time to explore things. We feel that for our kind of in-depthness, that kind of time is necessary. And also that the fact that these issues have a place, many of them don't, and therefore, they see, I remember one journalist who came and told me that, I never thought I'd in my lifetime see something that is called gender journalism. And so therefore, I'm so glad that this exists, because then I can report on things that I have wanted to report, but my male editors have said, oh, okay, this can go into page 6, or, totally. And if it's a digital outlet, on that day, if there's a human rights violation in the way we understand human rights violations to be, then this issue gets sidelined. So in that sense, we've been able to sort of find a place for ourselves, but more than a place for ourselves, find a place for the issues that need to be talked about more and more. And I only hope that, my fervent wish is that there should be more of us and not less. So yes, so essentially what we're trying to do is we're just trying to help to rewrite the narrative. So yeah, any of you from the audience wants to pitch us stories that that you think are important to be done, please feel free to, and let's together change this narrative that exists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bhanupriya ma'am, for the uh, all the insights you've shared and the work of BehanBox that we've come to know more about. I think it's so inspiring to see, and given the influence that media has on society, it's so pertinent to bridge this gap, the historical imbalance that has been there, and who's telling the story in the news, and from this perspective. So I shall now embark upon the Q&A session. Um, just to humbly reiterate, I shall be reading comments and queries from the chat box. In case you wish to ask your question verbally, please feel free to raise your hands before unmuting. And please keep questions brief and to the point. Any more queries following the session can be mailed to us at 5elements.sdg@gmail.com. So as we wait for the questions, I just had a something to ask. So if every time we try to come up with something that challenges the status quo, there's a lot of resistance that we face from people who don't believe in the vision or feel that it's too ambitious to achieve. So while building BehanBox, were there any challenges of this sort that you faced, and how did you deal with them? Just to inspire anyone else with these budding ideas on how to challenge the status quo and power relations.
Yeah, I think I've got to be honest. I think the biggest challenge came from within, really, because and for any budding entrepreneurs or doers, really, I would say that please don't listen to that voice. Okay, this is my own my own learning, that there will always be that voice that's telling you that, oh, this is, but are you is the work that you're doing important, right? So there was always, so the fact that for us, we, because we were building it during the pandemic, right, there was there was so much going on in all our collective lives and so on, that that itself was a challenge in so many ways, because we were all operating, before we found the new normal, we were all operating on actually building something very virtually. So just trying to find the people and to do the stories, etc. For us personally, we didn't come from big brand names and so on. So in the initial times, just getting journalists to write for us and just making them see the vision was a bit difficult, I have to say. Even today, when people when we say gender based issues, people come up with the usual, oh, menstruation, or we want to talk about how menstruation is affecting women in our village, or lack of access to safe water. And so I'm not saying they're not important, okay, but I'm saying there's the thing, when you the understanding that gender issues are much bigger, much wider, and anything can be a gender issue, is still taking time to build. So yeah, those are some of the challenges. And not to talk about the funding bit, which now people see the value, but when we started off, I do remember funders telling us that yeah, but why, in spite of all the talk about gender equality and everything, it's not something they felt at that time had any kind of a prospect.
Shruti has raised her hand. Please feel free to ask the question.
Hello, good evening, ma'am.
I
Uh, I am Shruti and I am pursuing Masters in Gender Studies as well. So, my question is, as I got to know that you covered stories related to disability, and being a student, I also, chosen the topic of gender and disability, focusing on youth like 18 to 25 age group. So I just want to know, like, what are the challenges you face and how you curate all the stories, like.
hmm. Yeah, I think you're dealing with a very interesting. Sorry, was that from my end? Everything shut off. Yeah, Shruti, I've got to say, you are working on a very, very, not just very important topic, I should say, because disability is something that is so stigmatized. We know that, but even the kind of the range of disabilities and the laws, policies, etc. around it, the way they manifest, the way they work, and so on, are so poorly understood. And that's not just India, globally as well. So, and in India more so, because there is this persistent stigma, right? Even yesterday, I was seeing about the indigo incident in Ranchi, which is so for me, the key takeaway from that was how how the needle really has shifted among people who were really standing up with the disabled child, right? But even today, people use words like differently able, special needs, and so on and so forth. So first, the challenge really is and this is what we sought to sort of talk about, is the language around it. What is the appropriate language around disability, appropriate understanding of disability, and so on. So to your question about what challenges did we face curating the article, so we kind of had it was a fellowship we gave to three journalists who were supposed to do three stories each, and it's a continuing thing. So each of them were dealing with say one issue at one point of one they were looking at one topic at one point of time, right? So for them, the big one of the big challenges was really finding people that they can talk to, and so on, given that they are non-disabled, right? so there were particular challenges around that. So how do you on because we were all work and we continue to work remotely. So how do you talk to, say, a woman with disability who has suffered, who is a survivor of intimate partner violence, right? So how do you do that as a journalist? How do you talk to them? Right, you have to have a mediator. Suppose it's a deaf blind person, or so how do you have that conversation? It has to be mediated by someone else, or so those are real challenges when you are sort of exploring these issues around disability. Then also, we did have a 3-4 day training session, but it's something that needs more deeper training, etc., even for journalists, and actually particularly for journalists, because they're not, or rather I should say, we are not trained in these things. Really, we talk about so many issues, right? So specifically then to talk about disabilities, which has its own nuances, which needs to come with its own sensitivities, and challenging your own biases, your own so on, is very, very important. And that's something the journalists have learned to do over the last 4-5 months that they've been working around these fellowships. But that's not all. Just finding people who fall within the ambit of, and who want to talk about it, or who are ready to talk about it. How do you trust people who just come into your life and say, oh, we're trying to talk, we are writing a story on an intimate partner violence, or what does it mean to be a mother? How do you do that within that short time frame? You've got to build trust and all of that, which is why we work with an organization that works on disabilities called Rising Flame, which has been doing pioneering work. And so that kind of interface makes it easy for journalists to sort of have that conversation, because they trust Rising Flame, so they kind of talk to them based on that trust. But we do a lot of sensitivity training before we ask them to talk to people with disabilities. I hope that answers your question, Shruti.
Yes, ma'am. Um, because I am also thinking about the same, as I am, targeting youth specifically for my, research project. That's why I asked the
Okay.
question.
You could probably write to Rising Flame and yeah.
Okay, ma'am, thank you.
Before we come to the last question, there are two questions in the chat box. If you'd like to read them yourself.
Yeah, okay. Um, right. How are you perceived, acknowledged by mainstream media? What is the impact you seek? So Arun, yeah, when we started off, because we weren't really very well known in the mainstream media, because, like I said, we didn't come with those big tags of already worked with, say, X, and then started off with a niche outlet and so on. I came from a very sort of a very what should I say, inconspicuous background myself. So but really, like I said, the Asha worker story, that series really kind of catapulted us. And that was one of the first things we did really with BehanBox. So in a way, I have to say that it was not that difficult for us, because the first story itself, one of the first stories that we did, was so impactful. In fact, Ravish, from NDTV, he had covered that series of ours, and he was really glowing in his praise and everything. And so everyone started to take notice, and that was in July, in exactly the month that we started. and since then we've, because of the collaborations we've had, we've been able to, and also because of the kind of sensitivity with the kind of angles that we bring to our reportage, we feel that mainstream media both is beginning, has been collaborating with us, not beginning, but has been. We did with Hindu, we did with Article 14, India Pen, News Minute, East Mojo, name it. So they, all of them are sort of, I would say, some of them have already been doing like News Minute, etc. They're pretty gender sensitive themselves, but others are beginning to sort of see, and we see that shift with so now they're also beginning to talk about things, but I mean, it's because we are completely niche and we can completely focus on those issues. We are able to go in depth, whereas with them they are not really, because of the amount of newsprint available or space available and so on. And also all of this needs a particular kind of training and lens also. So I think in some ways that will begin to change, I feel. And Rajan is asking how many percentage of real gender issues are reporting in the media. Like I showed you in the first chart itself, that, I think just 14% of news items in the media are gender, are focusing anything on, forget gender, are to do with women. Okay, just 14%. So you can imagine how much that is. And so hardly any, actually, to your question. Kayusha, okay. Firstly, a big congratulations to BehanBox. Thank you. Question, the issues seem to be all pervasive across locations, laws, professions. Is there a prioritization on areas which you're focused on? Otherwise, this would spread your team very thin. Right. So Kayun, we do, like I said, for us, every issue is a gender issue because every issue affects women and other genders differently than others. And even within that, different marginalizations differently. But there are certain issues that what we call verticals, right? We've developed certain verticals which are issues that we completely focus on: women and work. So women and their participation in the workforce is a big area of work for us. We are building on women and climate change, which is, we've just begun to do certain stories, and in the coming months we are going to go full on, because we feel that climate change is a very gendered issue, and not much is, yes, there are reports and there are academic reports, but not so much in popular media. The other thing we focus a lot around is laws, because so simply the whole idea of having this awareness about laws. And believe me, most people don't, most women don't, most privileged women don't. So we want to make laws and policies much more simpler and understandable, so that they can be used by women where necessary. Gender and politics, like I said, is a big area of work that we do. Women and disabilities, I talked about. It's a series we did. Done a series of 15 stories for this year, and we plan to continue that, because we have barely touched the surface of that, and so on. So so these are, and that is why as we scale up, we build our teams. We look at, we plan to have like people lead those teams. So women and health is something we have kind of begun to talk about, but that's an area that we want to build a lot more, because so many issues around, say, say for example, menopause, which affects women, right? A whole gamut of women. It's hardly talked about. Women don't know. Women are told, just get on with it. What does that mean? So yeah, to your point, there are certain areas that we are completely focused on. You have my appreciation for addressing the real need. Thank you. Thank you, Shama. Do update on your progress. There are several issues that are worth exploring in Tamil Nadu, which has developed, yes, but the skew is real. I completely agree with you. In fact, this notion that, oh, southern states are so much better than the northern ones is a complete myth and a sham, mainly because I come from one of the southern states and I know how that is. But our data tells us so. So that is what we try and demystify in a lot of our data stories also. And so, for example, from Tamil Nadu, we've reported quite a bit, especially around gender and politics. We've also reported on women's labor rights from Tamil Nadu, especially from Shivakasi's industries, Shivakasi's fireworks industry and the IT industry. So we've looked at women and labor force there. Yeah, and Kerala, for example, which is considered to be like amazing in has some real issues as far as gender skew is concerned. Workforce is one of them. We've covered a lot around trans healthcare for trans persons, and why all this or trans first policies of Kerala are not working for them. So Rajan is asking, climate change excluded a lot of women from mainstream and experience. That is true. That is true. Yeah, so we just did a story on how climate change is affecting the health of tea workers in Assam. No one would have thought, oh, these two are connected, but the more that is forcing more tea garden owners to sort of use more pesticides and agrochemicals, basically, which is affecting women. And the worst part is that there aren't no one's commissioning proper studies, scientific studies to establish that linkage. So doctors and health workers in those tea gardens in those North Bengal areas are facing, like, they're fighting a lonely battle to make these issues more mainstream. But yeah, there you are.
Thank you
So
so much, everyone. Yeah. With this, we come to the end of our session. It is a privilege to present the vote of thanks on behalf of my entire team here at Five Elements. Thank you, Bhanupriya ma'am, for taking time out of your busy schedule to share the impactful work being done at BehanBox. We are also very grateful to our enthusiastic participants for their curiosity and enthusiasm in making this a unique learning experience. If you have any more queries, please feel free to write to us at 5elements.sdg@gmail.com. Thank you, stay safe, and goodbye.
thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Is it still?